This lecture today is about the fork. So a fork is a double attack. It's when you attack two pieces at the same time. And your opponent doesn't have time to guard both of them. So they move one and then you capture the other one. So in this position, it's white to move. So the knight is actually a good piece to create a double attack. And that's because the knight moves in a way that other pieces can't move. So in this position, the best move is knight check. And this move attacks the king and the rook at the same time. The king moves, and then you take the rook. So in this position, this is actually called a royal fork. And that's because the knight moves and attacks the king, queen, and the rooks all at the same time. So the king moves, and then knight takes queen. All of the positions are going to be white to move in this lecture, so I'll give about a few seconds before I start telling the answer, but just pause the video if you want to try to solve it. So here the best move is bishop takes c6, and this actually attacks the king and the knight at the same time. King moves, then you capture the knight, and now here's another double attack which hits the rooks. One of the rooks will move, and then you take the other one. Here the best move is rook to b7. This attacks the knight and the king at the same time. The king moves, and then you take the knight. So notice whenever you find a double attack, it's often attacking a piece in a way that they can't move. A bishop or rook can attack a knight, and a queen can attack pretty much anything. In this position, notice that all of black's pieces are undefended, so when you're looking for tactics, it's often important to try to figure out if something is undefended, then there's likely a way to take advantage of that. So here the best move is queen takes pawn, and this attacks the rooks, the bishop, and the knight and the king all at the same time. So if the king goes to f8, and then this is another double attack. So also the king can go to d8. And if king c7, then queen takes a2. So notice in this position that the knight and the rook are both undefended as well. So the king is in check and the king moves to b3. And this is a double attack on the rook and the knight. The rook moves and then you capture it. So in this position, notice that the king is on an open diagonal and this bishop is undefended. So when you think of those two things together, you can think queen c2 check. So in this position, you actually create a double attack, and that's with bishop takes g6. And this move attacks the king and the bishop. So the king moves, then you take. Here it's white's move, and notice that this pawn is not defended. Also this one. So you have the move knight to c7 check. So here you have a similar idea, and you can actually create a double attack by sacrificing your queen temporarily and playing queen takes d5. Now knight c7 check captures the queen back, so after all of that, you've won a pawn. Here it's black to move, and they play knight takes b3, and this attacks both rooks at the same time. So this looks like a winning move, but instead white has the response bishop to d5, and that attacks the knight and the king at the same time. The king moves, and then you take. In this position, it's black to move, and they play knight takes b3. And now here you have an opportunity to create a double attack, and that's by playing rook takes b3. And bishop to d5 attacks the king and the rook at the same time. The king moves, and then you take the rook. So in this position, it's white to move, and notice what is hanging of blacks. And so the rooks are not defended, and this pawn is not defended. So you can find the move rook to g5 check, which attacks the pawn and the king at the same time. King moves, and then you take the pawn. Here's a similar situation, and you can actually create that same tactic and win a pawn by playing knight takes g4. Okay, in this position, it's black to move, and they play rook to b6. And so notice that this rook's not defended and this bishop's not defended. So you can play king to c5, and this move attacks all three pieces at the same time. The rook is defending the knight, but let's say they were to play here, then you capture. So the rook moves, and then you take. So here it's black to move, and they play pawn to d4, which looks like it's a good move because the king is in check and the knight defends the pawn. However, white can play rook takes d4. And now, after the knight takes, this is a double attack. So right now, white traded a rook for a knight and a pawn, so they're technically down 1 point in this position, but as soon as the rook moves, then you can play bishop takes c3. And so white won a pawn and 2 knights for a rook, so that's an advantage of 2 points.